So hi everyone, sorry for the delay. So I'm Liz Hart and I want to talk to you about a different aspect of healthcare. I know it's been alluded to by most of the other speakers, which is the impact of our emotions on our health and particularly on cancer. And I think I was introduced as having a bit of a background in this. I've been working in this field for about 14 years. And I first came across this technique, emotional freedom technique, when I was recovering from a serious illness myself. And I wasn't recovering that well. I was taking a long time and I was looking, as many of you may have been looking, for something that would help me. And I realized that I had some emotional baggage that was really interfering with my recovery. And I came across this very interesting technique. And it was simple, it was easy to use, and I could do a lot of it myself, which seemed like a really handy thing. And I found it made a huge difference for me, and I became totally intrigued with the whole technique and how it fitted with my beliefs and my background. So I carried on studying and now teach this strategy to other people and work in this field. So I want to talk to you a little bit about it, what it is and how it all works. So we all know that our emotions are biochemical. When we have an emotion, it has an effect on our body. It affects our thinking. They're all linked together. These aren't separate things. And so, as well as being able to affect our physical health through medications and exercise and diet, we can also influence them through our emotions and our emotional health. And emotional freedom technique is really all about creating more choice in our life. And we do that by reviewing the different beliefs that we have and the emotions that are involved in that. So we have kind of two different sets of beliefs going on in our lives. We have those things that we consciously believe. These are the things that we've chosen, that we all want. And some of those might be simple things like, I want to lead a healthy lifestyle. And on the other side of that, we have our unconscious beliefs, which are things that we've forgotten we chose a long time ago, things that are social conventions, family patterns, reactions, and rebellions. So we might want to lead a healthy lifestyle, but we might be a smoker. And the reason we began smoking was that it encouraged that sense of rebellion. So many people learn to smoke when they're in their teens. And it's what they do down behind the bike shed to be naughty, to prove that they're not going to be doing what the grown-ups told them to do. And the habit becomes identified with that sense of rebelliousness, that breakout, their sense of independence. So even though they might consciously want to give up the habit of smoking, it feels like they're losing something really important to them, which is that sense of independence and rebellion. And so all these things become quite confused. And what we can do with EFT is begin to tease that out for ourselves. So EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Technique. And lots of people consider it like a form of emotional acupressure. You've all heard of acupuncture, yeah? Where you're going to be using needles and specific energy points in the body. Been around for thousands of years. And acupressure is just where we use finger pressure like this, rather than a needle, to impact on those energy points in the body. And what we've discovered is that by putting our attention on something that's bothering us, while we also apply pressure to these individual points, we can affect a rapid change in that emotion. So if someone's very sad, we can have them focus on the sadness while they're putting pressure on these energy points, and the amount of sadness they're feeling can drop away so that they can then begin to process that information. It's no longer stuck there. So in effect, freedom equals choice, your ability to choose for yourself what's important for you rather than following a convention or a habit or an old pattern that we don't really want. It's a process of self-liberation, really, of creating what we want for ourselves rather than following these old patterns. In its simplest form, EFT can help you relieve bad feelings, being grumpy, being tired, being sad, being angry with someone. It can help relieve physical discomforts because, again, what's happening in our body is not separate from our emotions or our thinking. It can just make you feel a bit better, and it can help you manage those everyday stresses. So if you had a rough day at work, you've had to deal with difficult clients, so on and so forth, then you can use this technique to kind of help you feel better, get on with your day, not carry that forward with you. And it does this brilliantly. It's used by people all over the world. It's used in about, I think last count, about 60 different countries around the world. And millions of people. One of my colleagues here from New Zealand, Deepak Mostert, he was in Thailand when the big Boxing Day tsunami hit there, and in Indonesia. And he was asked by the government there to go in and help. And so he alone has gone through with teams over a period of about 10 years since that. And he's taught over 1 million people in Indonesia how to use this simple technique to help themselves deal with the trauma that they experience through those losses and that experience. It's been used with war veterans. So what they found in the research they did in the US with the Vietnam vets who had been suffering from war trauma for 20 to 30 years when they were approached with EFT, was that after 6 to 10 sessions of EFT, they no longer qualified as having post-traumatic stress. And that was quite huge, given that many of these veterans had been through lots of different treatment programs already for the stress that they were experiencing. Some of them had their first night's sleep in 20 years, or their first whole night's sleep in over 20 years, based on their use of this technique. So it made some very huge differences for them in what was going on. But EFT goes, as I'm saying, EFT goes beyond just simple management. EFT really allows you to do much, much more. It really allows people to transform some long-standing difficult traumas and be able to create new pathways in their life for themselves. It's one of the things that I do with a lot of my clients is work with some of these most difficult things. Recently I was working with a client who is a businessman, and he came to me with an inquiry about, I want to start a new business and I've got all the plans ready and I just find I'm not doing the things I need to do to launch this business, and I don't understand what's getting in my way. And so I sat there and I had a chat with him about his history in business and employment and the things that had happened in his life so far in that field. And it turned out he'd had some business failures in the past, he'd had some difficult employment situations. And so I took him back to just consider one of these. And while he was doing that, I said, I just want you to close your eyes for a minute and just focus on that one conversation that happened way back when you discovered that someone had really betrayed your trust in that business field. And suddenly he was flooded by tears, deeply distressed, and he said to me, I didn't even know that was there. And then what was so interesting was that within about 5 to 10 minutes, he could then talk very easily about that event, talk about that interaction, and see that he had made some choices that were involved in that situation that helped create that. So he then realised that he could do something different himself to avoid that situation ever coming up again. And he shifted his thinking from one of having been a victim of other people's bad behaviour to someone who could actually then take an active role in making sure that kind of situation never arose from again. And suddenly he found he was feeling a lot more enthusiastic about moving forward with his business. So we get to make a choice whether we're going to just go for relief, things that make us feel a bit better, or whether you really want to do something that's going to transform those underlying behaviours and beliefs so that they don't keep coming up. EFT is a great self-management strategy. It's an easy thing to do to make you feel a bit better, but you can also go deeper, and it's going to allow you to change those beliefs so those things don't come back. So if we go back to smoking, you can use EFT to temporarily dampen down a craving. So right now, you don't feel like another cigarette. But you can also use it to go back and find out, well, why did I start smoking in the first place? Deal with that so that the craving never actually comes back up again. And so even if you do stop smoking, you're not going to just transfer to another addictive kind of substance. So we've just been hearing about, this new option of a diet that we can use. For many of us, switching our diet is quite difficult. We all have these habits, we have these attachments. How many of us were given sweet treats when we were kids for being good, for celebrations, yes, to make us feel better. And so when we stop allowing ourselves or feeding ourselves with these things, we can find ourselves really struggling with that. We're in a bad space, we're feeling down, we're feeling sad. We can automatically begin reaching for those foods. So EFT is one of those strategies you can use to help you make those transitions around diet so that life's a bit easier for you. And ditto with exercise and so on and so forth. It allows you to make those transitions. People often come to me and say, I really just want to change myself. I don't like this about me. And I have a quite different perspective on what we do with EFT. For me, it's really about getting to know ourselves and actually appreciate who we are under all these layers of learning and bad experience. So for me, it's not really about changing ourselves. It's more about a process of loving and accepting who you really are, of discovering who you really are, and coming to appreciate that. And that's my perspective on what we're doing here. We're not really trying to make ourselves different. So EFT is about finding and honouring who you really are without the pain and the baggage and the conventions. Because I really believe we are just these amazing beings, and that's what we want to bring to the fore. And EFT just allows us to do that just by removing layer after layer of emotional baggage and stories so that we really find out who you are at the bottom of it all. So when you have an issue like you've had an argument with your partner, and we've heard, from the research in China that emotional relationships, partnerships, this is something that has an influence on how much we end up displaying cancer in our experience. And so when you've had that argument with your husband, that brings your emotion up. So when you start tapping on that anger, you might bring that down, and then you might notice there's a sadness there. And then you might notice that, it just reminds you of something that happened way back here with your dad. So you go back and you do some tapping down through those issues. You discover that you learned something back there, which was maybe it's not okay to tell you how I feel. That might be the belief that's down there. And so by transforming that, you can say, well, is that really useful for me to believe that? Is that helpful? And if not, then you can begin to make the shift around that belief. So you can actually change it to, it's important that I express how I feel to you. That's how I'm going to get close to you. That's how you're going to really know me. So you get to start making those kinds of choices. And it's interesting because just because you've always believed something, just because it's always been said about you, doesn't mean that it's actually true. You might have grown up with your mum or your dad saying, well, you've always been a bit slow. You've always been a bit bad-tempered. That's who you are. That doesn't mean it's true just because everybody else saw it that way. And you can change that to be what you would like it to be. EFT, works through our energy system. So I mentioned acupuncture before. You know that there are energy meridians through the body. And when we work at that low level, at that energetic level, our thoughts and our emotions and our physicality are all connected and all affected. So by working through our energy system, we impact on all of those things at the same time. So sometimes while we're tapping on an emotional issue, what we find is someone reports afterwards, I know we were just tapping around, that thing that happened with mum way back when, mum and dad divorced. But it's really interesting, I'm not having those migraines anymore since we talked about that. And we didn't even talk about my migraines, but they've just gone. And that's quite a common kind of response to people when they're talking about EFT. And what I'd like to do is show you some slides relating to one lady I worked with. And she had a basal cell carcinoma. It was on the side of her foot. And she was on a waiting list, waiting for some surgery. She needed to have surgery that was too advanced for any of the other kinds of treatments that were available. And for her, surgery was quite a difficult thing because of some other health conditions that she was experiencing. And so I was having a chat to her about what was going on for her in her life. And the story she told me about what was going on for her was that her youngest daughter was leaving home. And that would mean that she would be living alone for the first time in her life. She had married quite young. She had had 8 children, and she had raised them with her husband. Her husband had now died. And so for the first time, she would be by herself. And somehow she had convinced herself that when her daughter left home, none of her other children would come to see her because they only really came to the house because her daughter was there. And I was sort of slightly amused in some ways by the story because I knew that this woman, probably 4 of her children would visit her in any one week at least. They were quite a large, well-knit family. But that was her belief. So I started doing some of the EFT, and we sometimes call it tapping. So I was tapping with her about these different fears and concerns. We never actually talked about the tumour itself. We talked about the social relationship that was going on, about her fears, about her concerns, about what was happening for her and her family. And at a certain point towards the end, she kind of clicked to the idea that, have I really created this just to stop Laura leaving? Laura was also the daughter's name, which makes it a little more complicated. And it was very interesting because the tumour was on her foot, which meant that she could do pretty much anything she wanted except go out by herself. She couldn't drive and she couldn't walk very far. She could make it to the letterbox, but she couldn't go any further. And so in some ways what the tumour meant, what it meant was that she needed someone to come and help her with some things on a regular basis, which meant she was sort of building in a guarantee that the family would be visiting. So when we talked about that aspect of it, she was quite shocked and sort of says, but I would never want to stop my daughter going away. I'd never want her to stop leaving home to go and be with this lovely man that she's met, that she was moving to Christchurch at the other end of the country. I'd never want to get in the way of that. And I says, well, I'm absolutely sure you wouldn't want to get in the way of that. I can understand that. And what we noticed is that within a week, the tumour started to shrink. This was 2 weeks later. And I'll just flick back so you see the difference in the presentation of that. And what we noticed over the next sort of period of weeks, really, I think it was about 6 to 8 weeks, the tumour just continued to shrink and disappear And this was at 4 months later. And that was without any other interventional treatment. So that was kind of interesting, yeah? Even more interesting is it was my mum. And that's my lovely sister Laura too. So we can do some very interesting things. We can activate our own internal healing as well as do all the other things that are necessary. So Mum was still on the waiting list. She was still prepared to go through with a surgery if that's what she needed. But by attending to the emotional issues that were related to this somehow, she was able to reverse this process. Interesting. So this is pretty much a helping hand here. There's a lot you can do for yourself. And EFT is a very simple technique. I teach children as young as 4 or 5 the basics of the technique for themselves. So I reckon if they can get it, we can probably get it. I taught my son when he was about 8, and he went along to school a few months later, and his best friend was sitting in a maths test at school. And he was a little Chinese boy, and he experienced a lot of family pressure to always be the smartest kid in class, get the top marks. And he hadn't been studying very much, so he was quite upset one day about this test because if he didn't get a good mark, he was going to be in some deep trouble when he got home. And so my son actually sat there and did some tapping with my son, with this boy, with Kev, in the classroom about his upset and his fear. And very quickly, Kev settled down and he aced the test. So interesting, even children can learn it, even children can pass it along. So I thought what I would do rather than just talk about it today is I'd actually give you all the opportunity to actually try a little bit for yourself. Would that be interesting? Just see how it feels for yourself. You'll probably need to just pop your books down for a moment, and I'm just going to just sort of talk you through the process. Very simple, as I say, kids can learn it, we can probably manage. So what I thought we would focus on so you could actually have the experience of this for yourself was just a simple sensation in your body. So what I'd like you all to do first is if you just close your eyes for a moment, and I want you just to check inside your body and notice if there's anywhere you feel any tension or discomfort. Okay? And when you notice something, just pop your eyes open so I can see that you've found something. Yeah? Good. It looks like most of you have found something. So what I'd like you to do again is I want you to be more specific this time in your awareness of what you're noticing. So what that means is I want you to describe it to yourself, exactly where that discomfort is and what it feels like. Is it hot, cold, sharp, achy, tight? How would you describe it? So just close your eyes and do that for yourself for a moment, and then again just pop your eyes open when you've discovered something. Good. Excellent. Okay. So the third thing I'm going to get you to do is I'm going to get you to close your eyes again for a moment, and this time what I want you to do is just give that discomfort a number, with 0 being I don't feel it at all and 10 being it's really uncomfortable. And when you have a number, and it's just a guess, so I don't need decimal point accuracy, about a 4, about a 7, whatever it is for you, just your truth. And that's the interesting thing about EFT. It's all about telling your truth, whatever that might be. And, EFT brings together things we know from a lot of healing traditions, that it's about being honest, it's about self-acceptance, and it's also about the healing power of touch. And what we do with EFT, of course, is we touch ourselves with the tapping. And the places that we tend to do the tapping are places that we all naturally go to if we've had a shock or an upset. How many of us go, oh my gosh, what happened? Oh. The places that we touch and tap on are the places that we spontaneously go to. I'm not telling you anything new here. I'm just going to show you a way to do it really well that's going to help you feel better faster and more effectively than just the, oh my gosh, yeah? So has everybody got a number now? Yeah? Okay, who would like to just tell me your numbers? What's your number?
8.
8, and you?
6.
6, anyone else?
7.
7? Okay, so we got some quite high numbers there. Okay, so noticing or attention is the first step of EFT. So there's 3 steps, A, B, C. First one's attention. It's all about just noticing what's true for me right now about my experience, yeah? The second step is what we call balancing, and that's when we're going to tap on the side of our hand here. And the point we're aiming for is called the karate chop spot, and it's pretty easy to find. It's the bit that you would do a karate chop with if you were going to karate chop something. So the idiot-proof technique, use the flat of one hand along the side of the other hand between the bottom of the little finger and the wrist. And you're just going to tap quite fast like that. And what we say is, even though I have this experience, I'm willing to accept myself. Okay? So I'm going to get you all to repeat that statement, but what I'm going to get you to do is, instead of saying this experience, I want you to describe to yourself this feeling. So even though I've got this sharp pain under my left shoulder blade, even though I've got this dull ache in my left knee, even though I feel a bit sick in my stomach, like that. And we can all do it together, so nobody will be able to hear you in particular, okay? It is useful to say the words out loud. There's something interesting that happens when we say the words out loud and they come back and we actually hear ourselves. And often we don't listen to ourselves very well, and when we hear what we say out loud, we go, oh, really? It doesn't quite sound right. But we sometimes have to get it out of our head and out through our mouths in order to hear ourselves well, okay? So we're going to just tap here, and I'll say the words, and then you can just repeat them back to me. So even though I have this pain somewhere in my body, and you say your words, I'm willing to accept myself. Congratulations, that's the balancing step complete, yeah? The third step is where we tap on the different energy points in our body. And we'll do it monkey see, monkey do. So I'll do it, then you do it, because that makes it easy. And when we're tapping on each of the different energy points, again, we just say a couple of words that keeps us focused on what it is that we're trying to clear, okay? So it might be the sharp pain in my knee, sharp pain in my knee, sharp pain in my knee. So you're just going to say the same words over and over, and it'll be exactly the words that you just put in that phrase when you were saying tapping on the karate chop, yeah? So the first point's right on top of your head. So this discomfort I'm experiencing, and you say your experience. Between your eyebrows, this experience I'm having. The side of your eye, this experience I'm having. Up close under your eye, this experience I'm having. And a little groove under your nose, this experience I'm having. Just underneath your collarbone, right in the middle there, this experience I'm having. On the side seam of your brow, ladies, and guys in line with your nipple, this experience that I'm having. Ladies can't measure it the same way, I'm sorry. Back to the top, this experience I'm having. You all look cool. You should see it from my point. This experience I'm having. This experience I'm having. Under your eye, this experience I'm having. Under your nose, this experience I'm having. Under your lips. Collarbone. You're doing great. Just keep going. And the side seam of your brow again. Good. Just take a big breath in. And let go. Good. So I want you to tune into exactly what it was you were noticing before. So if you were tapping on the sharp pain under my left collarbone, I want you to check in now, how's that sharp pain under my left collarbone, and see what number's true now. It may be the same, may be different. Let me know what you've noticed.
Mine was only a 3, but it's gone.
It's gone completely? Well done. Anyone else? 7 to a 4? It's gone down to 5, and you were about 7 before, weren't you? Yes? Anyone else? 5 to 3. Did anyone go up? One person did? Okay, what happened for you? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. A 3 to a 5. So sometimes this happens and people get a bit frightened. They think, oh, I've done something wrong. Something bad has happened here. It's making it worse. It's a very common fear. What actually happens when the intensity goes up, it's a bit like taking the scab off and you kind of start to access what's really there. So often we can kind of be suppressing our intensity around something, whether it's a physical thing or an emotional thing. And so when we do the first little bit of tapping, it kind of goes, wow, so that's really what's there. Yeah? And what we do in that situation is we do exactly what we've been doing. We just do more of it. We say exactly the same thing because it's creating a change. And as we do some tapping of some more, we'll find one of two things happens. It will either crest and drop away within a moment or two, or somehow something else will come into our attention. We'll find we're thinking about something else, some other event, some other experience, and then what we do is we go and we tap about whatever it is our attention is sprung to. When we do that and come back to the original experience, we'll find that that intensity has dropped down. So there's just some past experience that's informing it, and it's just telling us that's what's going on. Did anybody not change at all? Yeah? So what happened for you? What were you tapping on? Do you mind sharing? Your lower back. And what did you say about it when we were doing this bit? Okay, so here's another really interesting thing about EFT, is that when we are tapping, we tell how it is rather than what we'd like. Okay? So rather than tap on, even though I wish my lower back could get better, we tap on, even though I've got this really annoying pain in my lower back, even though I've got this really tight, sharp pain just to the left of my tailbone. So it's more important to tell the truth than it is to poke our wishes in amongst it. That's how EFT works. And it's quite unusual. There's been a very strong positive psychology moves that says we shouldn't pay attention to the things that we don't like. We should just focus on the positive. How EFT works is by taking us basically from a reverse gear into neutral. Okay? So we have this negative experience, this discomfort, this pain, this sadness, this anger, this frustration, whatever it is. EFT addresses that and takes the intensity down to a neutral point so you can then change into a forward moving gear. Trying to focus on the positive is a bit like trying to crash from reverse into third without going through neutral, and it's not so good on the gearbox. Yeah? So EFT, we tell the truth about how it is that allows us to get to a neutral position where we can evaluate those beliefs more accurately and then move forward. How did other people get on with the tapping? Did anyone have a big change? Yeah?
I just had a problem with a numb bum.
It worked for the numb bum? Yep.
But yeah, it was.
It was quite a big shift. Great. So that's how we can use EFT in a very simple way, probably one of the simplest ways, to begin to change our experience. What we would do, having reduced it a little bit, is we would then tune back in and say, so if it's now started as a 7, it's now down to a 4, we would tap another couple of rounds of the tapping and bring it down some more. Would you like to try that and see if we can bring you down another few notches? Yeah? Yes, you may.
Which side you tap? If you had a pain in your left knee, should you tap your right side or?
It makes no difference. So the question was, does it matter if you've got the pain on one side of your body if you tap on that side, or should you tap on the other side? With EFT, our meridians are mirrored in the body, left and right, so it doesn't matter which side you tap on. It doesn't matter which hand you tap with. It doesn't matter if you mix them up. It doesn't matter if you cross the center of your body. It doesn't matter if you reverse the order of the tapping points. We teach the tapping points in a particular order because it's easier for people to do the same thing over and over rather than to start jumping around and not remember what they've done already. One of the things that makes EFT most successful is our ability to stay focused on the issue that we're tapping about. So we talk about it as using our mind like a laser to focus on the specific energy blockage that we're addressing. And then we use the tapping, bit like a shotgun. We tap on all the different energy meridians in order to clear that blockage. Yeah? Any other questions before we have another go? Yes?
This isn't a question so much. I was reading a little bit about this, ironically, just a little while ago, and
Mm-hmm.
for the skeptics or the people that worry about that whole energy thing, that there's been some scientific, like evidence-based scientific tests done on it. They had a really good success rate with people with, in particular, fibromyalgia.
Yes.
And apparently the science behind it, because some people need science, is that when you're thinking about something, it goes to a neuron cluster or in your brain.
Yes.
So by putting your attention there, you're going directly to that cluster.
Mm-hmm.
So often what happens is we've got negative connotations to that experience or that
Mm-hmm.
memory. So by revisiting it and then putting you're building the neurons every time you visit it.
Yes.
So by visiting it and then putting a positive spin on something that you've thought about before,
Mhm.
it creates new pathways that are positive rather than negative.
Yes.
Yeah, so I thought that was absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it is quite fascinating, and I've talked with Bruce Lipton a bit about this. Sorry, would you mind just repeating your comment? Because the people...
No, you tell us what you said.
Sorry.
The comment was, and I don't want to mess up what you were saying, but it was about that by having our focus, we were changing the neuron clusters in our brain and altering the pathways. And it is quite interesting. What EFT does is it takes us from, it seems to alter those neuron clusters as you were talking about, and it creates allows us to create some new connections. Yeah? And it's quite fascinating how rapidly it can work. I was at a conference last weekend where we were doing viewings of the human biofield. There's a new device that's available that allows you to actually see the energy meridians in the body, the energy centers in the body. And so what we had was someone on camera while we did some EFT with them. And you could actually see the different energy centers lighting up and shifting as we were doing the EFT work and as the different layers of the issue came up to them as they were doing the work, the whole energy field would shift. And it was really quite fascinating. So I think it's the first time it's been done as a running movie like that, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to actually capture it so that we can show this to people who weren't at the conference. The technology itself wasn't designed to be done as a movie. It was designed to be taking still shots because they didn't realize that people could actually change their energy field very quickly, yeah? So a movie was not going to be very effective, but what we actually showed last weekend was that these energy centers were lighting up and shifting as we moved from part of the issue to the next part of the issue to the next part of the issue. And it was really quite an exciting thing to see. So, sorry?
I have a question.
Yes.
I can speak not only just for myself, but for other breast cancer survivors.
Mm-hmm.
Phantom pain,
Yes.
and it triggers up both sides without realising and carry on going and disappear.
Yes.
So it's just instantaneous.
Mm-hmm.
Not just one breast, the other breast too. So I just want to know what's your feedback
On phantom pain?
What to do with the nerves, really?
Yeah.
Is it
Right.
same as your breast on either side, one or the other?
I'm not aware of any specific research that's been done on that. There is a body of research about EFT and energy psychology in general. I'm not aware of any specific research on that. I have heard anecdotal reports about it, that it has actually really helped people settle down those kinds of nerve reactions.
But the only trouble is it reoccurs.
Yes.
Parents, and it's drives you insane. It's painful.
And it can come up unexpectedly. And so one of the things that others have found, and again it's anecdotal rather than completely research-based at this point, is that by dealing with the emotions surrounding their surgery, surrounding their disease state, surrounding the whole picture for them, as that becomes transformed, their incident of this phantom pain and discomfort also goes. Yeah.
It reoccurs.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is it disappears and doesn't reoccur over time.
I think
Yes.
What is the difference between NLP and EFT?
NLP works on changing our thinking. EFT works on an energetic level, changing the emotional base. So NLP, I suppose my understanding of it is that it's more that it imposes new thinking structures. EFT works on more of a level of acceptance rather than trying to cover something. It takes away the covering so that what's real is actually exposed. So for me, it's quite a fundamentally different process. And for me, it's a more natural process. And one of the things I like about it is that it allows you to process things in your own way, in your own speed. Yeah? So you're learning to become more self-aware through the process. So what am I noticing now about this experience? Yeah? And we deal with that. And so now what am I noticing about this experience? And we deal with that till we get down to what's really fundamentally true for us. And to me, that's one of the beautiful things about EFT, because of course that increased self-awareness helps us take better care of ourselves in the long run. And it's something we do for ourselves. We're not waiting for the expert to tell us what's going on for us. We're actually developing our own wisdom and accessing it and integrating it. And to me, that's a really important part of our being able to be self-responsible about our health, is actually knowing ourselves and knowing our own truth. Yeah, any other questions? Good. So just take a moment and close your eyes and tune back into that sensation you were working with before, and just notice if it's the same now or whether the number's different. And just tune into what your number is now. Some of you may notice that the actual experience itself has changed. So what might have been a sharp pain before isn't sharp anymore. Maybe it's dull. And maybe it's moved from your shoulder to your neck. Yeah? Some of you may notice when you tune in that an emotion is attached to whatever sensation it is that you're working with. So that tight knot in your stomach might also be associated with some anxiety. That shortness in your breath might be associated with some fear. Just notice what your own truth is. And again, you don't need to share it with anybody else. Just notice for yourself what's true. And assign it a number. And when you have that number, just pop your eyes open. Good. Okay. So let's just do another couple of rounds and just see what happens when we do that. Yeah? So even though I still have some of this, whatever it was before, I'm willing to love and accept myself. This little something between your eyebrows, there's something I was noticing. Side of your eye, there's something I was noticing. Under your eye, there's something I was noticing. Little groove under your nose, there's something I was noticing. Under your lips, and maybe there's some emotion associated with it. there's something I was noticing. Under your arm. And maybe I've got a good reason for it. At the top of your head. And maybe I don't believe it can even change. Between your eyebrows. It's kind of weird that all this tapping stuff would make a difference. And I feel pretty silly doing it. Under your nose. This weird thing I've been noticing. This discomfort I'm noticing. Collarbone. This discomfort I'm noticing. And under your arm, this discomfort I'm noticing. Good. And again, just take a breath. And let go. Good. So what are we noticing now? Do you notice any further change? Yeah? What happened for you? Sorry? The feeling went completely? Excellent. Good. Anyone else?
Big reduction in the pain and the nerve ending.
Okay. So that's reduced for you. There's a big change. So excellent. So you can see that even just in a few minutes, we can make a significant change to our comfort levels. And the same thing happens when we address our emotions. And the interesting thing that I found about it is that it doesn't matter how long you've been experiencing a discomfort for, a phobia for, or fear or an anger. It doesn't matter how intense that emotion or that sensation might be. EFT can still help reduce it very quickly. And, so I can work with someone who's had a phobia for 30 years, and it will clear as quickly as someone who's just discovered that they're really quite antsy about being locked in a cupboard. Yeah? So it's quite interesting that that's not going to be an issue, that you can still get a positive effect in a very short order. So there's that helping little hand. I'll just run through this because we've done this. And that's the process that we would go through, that we've been through. Yeah? So who would use EFT among you? Well, anyone who doesn't want to get cancer and wants to take care of their emotional health, that would be a good place to start. Now, I'm not saying that if you do EFT, you'll never ever get cancer. Okay? And I'm also not saying that you've caused your own cancer by not dealing with your emotions. Okay? Emotions are one of the things that will feed into an overall health picture that can contribute. But what the research shows is that 85+% of the people with cancer will have some emotional contributor, and not just cancer, any serious disease. So that taking care of those emotions is one of the key things you can do for yourself that will increase your chances of having a healthy life. People with cancer will find it pretty useful. So what do I do with people with cancer? I work with them on, initially, just on the shock of finding out that this is what's happening for them. It's a big shock often. I work with them on how they're going to tell their families, their friends, or if they're going to tell them, and what they're going to tell them. I help them deal with going through the changes that are recommended for them, the conflicted information they're sometimes given. My naturopath says this, my doctor says this, my acupuncturist says this, my dietitian says that. I can't do it all. It's all too much. It's too hard. It's too difficult. All of that information, yeah? So EFT can help them deal with those conflicts that they're going to be facing. It helps them when they're faced with a lot of decisions about what treatment am I going to undergo. It helps them deal with the difficulties they may experience in relating to the different people involved in their care and their treatment. It helps them look at what was going on for them that this may have happened in their life. It helps them deal with the fact that they might die. And how they're going to face that, how they're going to talk to their families about that. Yeah? I find it's also invaluable for the family and friends of those people who have cancer. So how do they be the strong one that's supporting their family member? How do they deal with their feelings, their grief, their anger, their frustration, their loss? All of these things. And then also health and support personnel. So it's a pretty hard job, dealing with people who are sick, who are facing the trauma of going through this experience. And so for many healthcare workers, EFT can be really beneficial in how they manage themselves and their own stress levels with their work, and being able to just, at the end of the day, leave their work behind and go home and participate in their own lives in a healthy, balanced way. It's pretty invaluable. So it's about you making choices. It's about your life. You know, you can ignore the problem, you can manage it, you can clear it through, or you can make some more choices. And I think there's been a pretty consistent message today that it's all about your choices and what you can do and the choices you can make. So I hope that's been useful. I hope it's been helpful. If you want to know some more, please feel free just to get hold of me. And I'm happy to help you with that. There will be a beginner's workshop in a few weeks if you want to learn a little bit more about how to do the EFT for yourself, or I can be contacted for consultations. And if you're interested in training as a practitioner, if you're a healthcare worker who'd like to learn more to use it with your clients, I can put you into a practitioner training program so that you can be of service to your clients. So thank you. Any last questions? Thank you. So any last questions? We all questioned out. Yes?
I was just wondering, do you at any point, do you actually use positive after you've tapped and things may have shifted? I'm just aware of
Yes?
what's out there already, and just wondering, do you actually bring that into your work as well, or do you feel that it's not actually that necessary? It's another one of those add-ons that, you know what I mean?
It is a bit of an add-on.
Yeah.
Because of my philosophy that what we're doing is actually taking off these things that are actually covering how wonderful we are. For me, it's about removing those layers so that actually who we are is perfectly adequate and that we have our own internal wisdom and that's what we can follow. And we don't actually need to try and make ourselves more than we are because we're already glorious.
That makes sense.
If only we just believed it. Yeah?
Yeah, makes sense.
So that's my personal perspective on it. I've spent a lot of time connecting with Gary Craig, who's the guy who developed EFT in the US, and talked it through with him a lot. And that's very much in alignment with how he views it, that we are these incredible spiritual, holistic beings. And we're wonderful how we are. We're all different, we're all unique, but there's nothing wrong with us as we are. And that's what needs to be, if anything needs to be changed, it needs to be getting rid of all the stuff that we've piled on top of ourselves.
Yes.
Yes? Get rid of the blankets. Yes?
Wondering if there's a intrinsic link between the energy system and the emotional system, just from the way that this seems to be working, whether that's your understanding or not.
Yes, I believe there is. And I believe there's an intrinsic link between our energy system and our physical health, our emotional health, our spiritual health, our mental health. They're all interconnected. They can't be separated. That's my experience of it anyway. Yes. Excellent.